Okay, so continuing our readings on the six sense bases. Since Ajahn Titapanya snatched up one of mine yesterday, I did some quick reorganization here, so see what comes up. But I thought I'd start with a little bit of reading from the introduction to the Salayatana Wagga compilation of Bhikkhu Bodhis, the connected discourses of the Buddha of the Samyutta Nikaya, just from the introduction where he just talks a little bit in general, introduces some of the concepts regarding contemplation of the six sense bases, and then I'll do a couple of suttas, actually from the Majjhima Nikaya, and then possibly from the Udana. So this starts on page 1124 of the double volume of the Samyutta Nikaya, translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi, from the introduction to that chapter. The main pragmatic concern with the sense bases is the eradication of clinging, for like the aggregates, the sense bases serve as the soil where clinging takes root and thrives. Because clinging originates from ignorance and craving, and because ignorance sustains clinging by weaving its web of the triple delusion, permanence, happiness, and self, we find in the Salayatana Samyutta almost all the familiar templates used in the Kanda Samyutta. Often, in fact, these templates are here applied twice to generate parallel suttas for the internal and external sense bases. Thus, to dispel ignorance and generate true knowledge, we repeatedly hear the same melodies in a slightly different key, reminding us that the sense bases and their derivatives are impermanent. Are impermanent, suffering, and non-self. That we must discern the gratification, danger, and escape in regard to the sense bases. That we should abandon desire and lust for the sense bases. However, despite large areas of convergence between the two Samyuttas, the Salayatana Samyutta introduces several new perspectives that bear on the sense bases but have no exact parallels in relation to the aggregates. Thus, the Samyutta includes a long chain of 20 suttas which expose the flaws in conditioned existence, summed up under the caption, quote, the all. All, it is said, is subject to birth, aging, sickness, death, and so forth. And the all is nothing other than the sense bases and the mental processes arising from them. Several suttas in this chapter identify the six sense bases with the world, because the world, loka, is whatever disintegrates, lujjati, and because in the Noble's discipline, the world is understood as, quote, that in the world by which one is a perceiver and conceiver of the world. In one sutta, the question is raised why the world is said to be empty, sunya, and the answer given is because the six bases are empty of a self and what belongs to self. No parallels to these discourses are found in the Kanda Samyutta. This Samyutta also describes the six internal sense bases as, quote, old kama, which could not be said so plainly about the aggregates, for they comprise both kamically active and resultant phases of experience. We further find here that greater stress is placed on conceiving, manyita, the distorted cognitions influenced by craving, conceit, and views, with several discourses devoted to the methods of contemplation for uprooting all conceivings. The entire Samyutta ends with a masterly discourse in which the Buddha urges the monks to uproot conceiving in all its guises. Although the aggregates and sense bases jointly serve as the domain of craving and wrong views, a difference in emphasis can be discerned in the way the two Samyuttas connect these two defilements to their respective domains. The Kanda Samyutta consistently treats the aggregates as the objective referent of identity view, sakkaya ditthi, the views that seek to give substance to the idea of a self. When the patujana, or worldling, fashions a view about his or her identity, he or she always does so in relation to the five aggregates, We do not find any parallel text expressing identity view in terms of the sense bases. This difference in emphasis is understandable when we realize that the scheme of the aggregates spans a wider spectrum of categories than the sense bases themselves, and therefore offers the worldling more variety to choose from when attempting to give substance to the notion of myself. This, it must be stressed, indicates a difference in emphasis, not a fundamental doctrinal difference. For the sense bases can be grasped upon with the notions, this is mine, this I am, this is myself, just as tenaciously as the aggregates can. Thus we even find a series of 3 suttas which state that contemplating the sense bases as impermanent, suffering, and non-self leads respectively to the abandoning of wrong view, identity view, and view of self. However, as a general rule, the sense bases are not taken up for a thematic exposition of identity view in the way the 5 aggregates are, which is certainly significant. We see, too, that the entire Ditthi Samyutta on the diversity of views traces all these views to a misapprehension of the aggregates, not of the sense bases. In relation to the sense bases, the interest in views recedes into the background, and a new theme takes center stage: the need to control and master the senses. It is the sense faculties that give us access to the agreeable and disagreeable phenomena of the world, and it is our spontaneous, impulsive responses to these phenomena that sow the seeds of so much suffering. Within the untrained mind, lust, hatred, and delusion, the 3 roots of evil, are always lying latent, and with delusion obscuring the true nature of things, agreeable objects are bound to provoke lust and greed, disagreeable objects, hatred and aversion. These spontaneous reactions flood the mind and bid for our consent. If we are not careful, we may rush ahead in pursuit of immediate gratification, oblivious to the fact that the fruit of sensual enjoyment is misery. To inculcate sense restraint, the Salayatana Samyutta makes constant use of 2 formulas. One is the stock description of sense restraint, Indriya Samvara, usually embedded in the sequence on the gradual training. This formula enjoins the practice of sense restraint to keep the, quote, evil unwholesome states of covetousness and displeasure from invading the mind. The second formula posits a contrast between one who is intent upon a pleasing form and repelled by a displeasing form, and one who is not swayed by these pairs of opposites. The latter has set up mindfulness of the body, dwells with a measureless mind, and understands the, quote, liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom, where the evil states of lust and aversion cease without remainder. Though no explicit doctrinal allocations are made for these 2 formulas, it seems the first is prescribed in general for a bhikkhu in the initial stages of training, while the second describes the sense restraint of the trainee, one at a minimal level of stream enterer, perhaps to the natural sense restraint of the arahant. The practice of sense restraint is necessary in the Buddhist training, not only to avoid the mental distress provoked here and now by attachment and aversion, but for a reason more deeply connected to the ultimate aim of the Dhamma. The doctrine of dependent origination reveals that craving is the propelling cause of suffering, and craving springs up with feeling as its proximate cause. Feeling occurs in the 6 sense bases as pleasant, painful, and neutral feeling. And through our unwholesome responses to these feelings, we nourish the craving that holds us in bondage. To gain full deliverance from suffering, craving must be contained and eradicated, and thus the restraint of the senses becomes an integral part of the discipline aimed at the removal of craving. There's also a cognitive side to the teaching on sense restraint. Craving and other defilements arise and flourish because the mind seizes upon the signs, nimitta, and features, anubhyanjana, of sensory objects, and uses them as raw material for creating imaginative constructs, to which it clings as a basis for security. This process, called mental proliferation, papancha, is effectively synonymous with conceiving, manjnana. These constructs, created under the influence of the defilements, serve in turn as springboards for still stronger and more tenacious defilements, thus sustaining a vicious cycle. To break this cycle, what is needed as a preliminary step is to restrain the senses, which involves stopping at the bare sensum, without plastering it over with layers of meaning, whose origins are purely subjective. Hence the Buddha's instructions to the bhikkhu Malankiyaputta, which was read yesterday. In the seen, there will be merely the seen. And the beautiful poem the bhikkhu composes to convey this understanding, to convey his understanding of this maxim. Okay. So that's just a bit from the introduction and kind of giving the context of the six sense spaces as a contemplative tool, particularly as juxtaposed to the aggregates. So I thought that just by way of an example of from the suttas, there's this very nice, I thought, kind of moving sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya, number 143, the advice to Anathapindika, and it's a sutta where Sariputta goes to visit Anathapindika, who is on his deathbed, and offers him some reflections. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Sawati in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Now on that occasion, the householder Anathapindika was afflicted, suffering, and gravely ill. And probably everybody knows Anathapindika was one of the Buddha's chief lay supporters, a patron, really a sense, the strongest sense of the word. Then he addressed a certain man thus, "Come, good man, go to the Blessed One, pay homage in my name with your head at his feet, and say, 'Venerable Sir, the householder Anathapindika is afflicted, suffering, and gravely ill. He pays homage with his head at the Blessed One's feet.' Then go to the Venerable Sariputta, pay homage in my name with your head at his feet, and say, 'Venerable Sir, the householder Anathapindika is afflicted, suffering, and gravely ill. He pays homage with his head at the Venerable Sariputta's feet.' Then say, 'It would be good, Venerable Sir, if the Venerable Sariputta would come to the residence of the householder Anathapindika, out of compassion.' 'Yes, sir,' the man replied, and he went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to the Blessed One, he sat down at one side and delivered his message. Then he went to the Venerable Sariputta, and after paying homage to the Venerable Sariputta, he delivered his message, saying, 'It would be good, Venerable Sir, if the Venerable Sariputta would come to the residence of the householder Anathapindika out of compassion.' The Venerable Sariputta consented in silence. Then the Venerable Sariputta dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, went to the residence of the householder Anathapindika, with the Venerable Ananda as his attendant. Having gone there, he sat down on a seat made ready, and said to the householder Anathapindika, 'I hope you are getting well, householder. I hope you are comfortable. I hope your painful feelings are subsiding and not increasing, and that their subsiding, not their increase, is apparent.' 'Venerable Sariputta, I am not getting well. I am not comfortable. My painful feelings are increasing, not subsiding. Their increase and not their subsiding is apparent. Just as if a strong man were splitting my head open with a sharp sword, so too violent winds cut through my head. I am not getting well. Just as if a strong man were tightening a tough leather strap around my head as a headband, so too there are violent pains in my head. I am not getting well. Just as if a skilled butcher or his apprentice were to carve up an ox's belly with a sharp butcher's knife, so too Violent winds are carving up my belly. I am not getting well. Just as if two strong men were to seize a weaker man by both arms and roast him over a pit of hot coals, so too there is a violent burning in my body. I am not getting well. I am not comfortable. My painful feelings are increasing, not subsiding. Their increase and not their subsiding is apparent. Then, householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to the eye, and my consciousness will not be dependent on the eye. Thus you should train. You should train thus. I will not cling to the ear. I will not cling to the nose. I will not cling to the tongue. I will not cling to the body. I will not cling to the mind. And my consciousness will not be dependent on the mind. Thus you should train. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to forms. I will not cling to sounds. I will not cling to odors. I will not cling to flavors. I will not cling to tangibles. I will not cling to mind objects. And my consciousness will not be dependent on mind objects. Thus you should train. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to eye consciousness. I will not cling to ear consciousness. I will not cling to nose consciousness. I will not cling to tongue consciousness. I will not cling to body consciousness. I will not cling to mind consciousness, and my consciousness will not be dependent on mind consciousness. Thus you should train. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to eye contact. I will not cling to ear contact. I will not cling to nose contact. I will not cling to tongue contact. I will not cling to body contact. I will not cling to mind contact. And my consciousness will not be dependent on mind contact. Thus you should train. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to feeling born of eye contact. I will not cling to feeling born of ear contact. I will not cling to feeling born of nose contact. I will not cling to feeling born of tongue contact. I will not cling to feeling born of body contact. I will not cling to feeling born of mind contact. And my consciousness will not be dependent on feeling born of mind contact. Thus you should train. So you can see there, Sariputta starts with going through all the possible aspects of the six sense bases that one could possibly cling to, whether it's the internal organ itself or the external sense object, the consciousness related to it, the contact related to it, the feeling that's related to it, all the possibilities one by one. Yeah.
That's a question.
Yeah.
What does it mean by my consciousness won't be dependent upon, say, like feeling, dependent upon eye contact or something like that? Like my consciousness won't be dependent upon. What does that phrase mean?
My consciousness won't be dependent on.
Yeah, that's what it says at the end of each section. I'm wondering what that means.
Well, as far as I understand, the aspect of consciousness as a mental phenomena is sort of the overall purview of what it does. Is it's present with all forms of contact and consciousness within the five physical sense bases. That is all experienced in conjunction with the consciousness aggregate itself. So there has to be consciousness present in any one of those other physical sense bases for there to be an actual experience of the contact or the feeling or the the other experience, the consciousness of that particular sense base. He's basically also saying, just in terms of every physical sense base, also be aware that the consciousness that experiences each of those physical sense bases also shouldn't be picking up and assuming a sense of ownership, essentially, over them. That's how I understand it.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. So then Sariputta doesn't stop there, he continues. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to the earth element. I will not cling to the water element. I will not cling to the fire element. I will not cling to the air element. I will not cling to the space element. I will not cling to the consciousness element. And my consciousness will not be dependent on the consciousness element. Thus you should train. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to material form. I will not cling to feeling. I will not cling to perception. I will not cling to formations. I will not cling to consciousness. And my consciousness will not be dependent on consciousness. Thus you should train. So now he's moving into the aggregates. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to the base of infinite space. I will not cling to the base of infinite consciousness. I will not cling to the base of nothingness. I will not cling to the base of neither perception nor not perception. And my consciousness will not be dependent on the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Thus you should train. So moving from material form into the immaterial attainments, immaterial form. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to this world, and my consciousness will not be dependent on this world. I will not cling to the world beyond, and my consciousness will not be dependent on the world beyond. Thus you should train. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to what is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, encountered, sought after, and examined by the mind. And my consciousness will not be dependent on that. Thus you should train. When this was said, the householder Anathapindika wept and shed tears. Then the Venerable Ananda asked him, Are you foundering, householder? Are you sinking? I am not foundering, Venerable Ananda. I am not sinking. But although I have long waited upon the teacher and bhikkhus worthy of esteem, never before have I heard such a talk on the Dhamma. Such a talk on the Dhamma, householder, is not given to lay people clothed in white. Such a talk on the Dhamma is given to those who have gone forth. Well then, Venerable Sariputta, let such a talk on the Dhamma be given to lay people clothed in white. There are clansmen with little dust in their eyes who are wasting away through not hearing such talk on the Dhamma. There will be those who will understand the Dhamma. Then, after giving the householder Anathapindika this advice, the Venerable Sariputta and the Venerable Ananda rose from their seats and departed. Soon after they had left, the householder Anathapindika died and reappeared in the Tusita heaven. Then, when the night was well advanced, Anathapindika, now a young god of beautiful appearance, went to the Blessed One, illuminating the whole of Jeta's Grove. After paying homage to the Blessed One, he stood at one side and addressed the Blessed One in stanzas. Oh, blessed is this Jeta's Grove, dwelt in by the sagely Sangha, wherein resides the King of Dhamma, the fount of all my happiness. By action, knowledge, and Dhamma, by virtue and noble way of life, by these are mortals purified, not by lineage or wealth. Therefore, a wise person who sees what truly leads to his own good should investigate the Dhamma and purify himself with it. Sariputta has reached the peak in virtue, peace, and wisdom's ways. Any bhikkhu who has gone beyond, at best, can only equal him. That is what the young god Anathapindika said, and the teacher approved. When the young god Anathapindika, thinking, the teacher has approved of me, paid homage to the Blessed One, and keeping him on his right, he vanished at once. When the night had ended, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus, Bhikkhus, last night, when the night was well advanced, there came to me a certain young god of beautiful appearance who illuminated the whole of Jeta's Grove. After paying homage to me, he stood at one side and addressed me in the stanzas thus. O Blessed One, O blessed is this Jeta's Grove, and then to the end of that verse, at best only can equal him. That is what the young god said. Then the young god, thinking the teacher has approved of me, paid homage to me, and keeping me on his right, he vanished at once. When this was said, the Venerable Ananda said to the Blessed One, "Surely, Venerable Sir, that young god must have been Anathapindika, for the householder Anathapindika had perfect confidence in the Venerable Sariputta." Good, Ananda. As far as reasoning goes, you have drawn the right conclusion. That young god was Anathapindika, and no one else. That is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So I just think that's a lovely sutta, pertinent, of course, to the six sense basis, because the first half of it was essentially going through and talking about not clinging to any possible combination of the sense experience. And then he goes on and pretty much covers just about everything anybody else could possibly cling to, all the way up through the immaterial attainments. So I thought it was quite beautiful. Any questions on that before
Is the case of consciousness in that where there's multiple different Pali terms or like uses of consciousness being translated as one in this one?
I'm not absolutely sure because I didn't go back and look at the Pali, but I'm like 99% confident that probably it's the same word vijnana that's being translated in all of those cases. But you'll see through the suttas that there's sometimes a little bit of the word consciousness, the word vijnana is used to kind of refer to sort of slightly different aspects of what we translate as consciousness. So sometimes you'll see it, most of the time, almost entirely, all the time, you'll see it referring to the kind of sense consciousness that we're talking about, like the consciousness that's apparent in relationship to the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, the six sense bases. That's where you'll see consciousness mostly in relation to as a, part of as the fifth aggregate, essentially, but then also in relation to each of the sense bases. Occasionally, there are some references, he does use the word also in terms of like rebirth consciousness, so referring to the process whereby experience moves from one life to another life in terms of the movement of mental processes through death and then rebirth. So he uses a slightly different modifier in relation to the word, but the word vijnana is still used in that case. Pono bhavika, is that rebirth consciousness? Mm-hmm. Rebirth consciousness, pono bhavika? No, what am I thinking?
That is rebirth, but the actual term, say that's used in Paticca
for rebirth.
Spacing out. My memory, it starts with an S.
Okay. Yeah, I can't remember myself. But there is anyway a special modifier that goes along with vijnana at that time. And then also sometimes there are a few references where he talks about vijnanam anidasanam, which is consciousness variously translated like consciousness without feature or consciousness without a base, or Ajahn Jeff, I think, kind of refers to it as consciousness that doesn't land anywhere. And that seems to be, it's hard to tell. There's a lot of scholarly debate about what that actually means, but generally speaking, I think it kind of refers to the form of consciousness that one experiences when the mind is completely liberated. So it's like consciousness that doesn't essentially divide itself into landing on a sense base per se, like specifically sight, sounds, taste, touch. It refers to more of the global quality of awareness that is unaffected by any of the taints of any of the asavas, any clinging, delusion, greed, hatred. So it doesn't essentially land and grow and proliferate in a particular sense space. So it's kind of an interesting way that the Buddha uses that word to refer to kind of both consciousness related specifically to a sense base, which is clearly of, the nature to arise and cease, and also he uses it in a different context for rebirth, consciousness, and yet in another situation where he's referring it to a specific kind that is actually part of the liberated experience. Kind of a long answer to your short question.
So it would be like awareness in different contexts, or awareness in relation to different...
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, yes. Yeah, I mean, you start getting into, again, some of those kind of doctrinal debates about, the nature of consciousness. And generally, again, specifically much more, almost the vast majority of the time being used in relation to that kind of part of the conditioned realm consciousness. But some people, I think, some of the, particularly in the Thai tradition and maybe even Ajahn Jeff, I don't want to, impute too much upon what he says, but my understanding from some of the stuff I've read, he kind of basically talks about that very pure form of Vijnana Anidasanam as maybe essential to that, essentially the same as, liberated chitta, liberated awareness, the heart, the mind, that is without defilement. But don't quote me.
It reminds me a little bit of when Ajahn Chai, I think when he said the palm reader said, "Oh, you have a lot of anger," and he said, "Oh, it's true, but I don't use it." Or did he say it has nowhere to land or something like that? Do you remember the example?
I can't hear you.
Do you remember the example where a palm reader asked Ajahn Chai to read his palm, and he usually wouldn't allow someone like that, but he saw that he had faith, and then he said, "Oh my gosh, you have so much anger," and Ajahn Chai said, "Oh, that's true, but I don't use it." But I thought I'd also heard it translated as like it doesn't have anywhere to land or something like that.
No, don't use it.
And,
Maybe try. It's very, it's oftentimes that's, like in Thai, you can actually be very simple and straightforward.
with the translation.
And then people read into it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
In brief, I think I've read that some of the Tibetans call that consciousness the seventh consciousness.
Which consciousness?
Sort of nice.
Different again.
I haven't read.
The different again. Abhayagiri storehouse consciousness.
Oh.
So that has no relationship to what we're talking about.
That's something else again.
Oh, okay, good. Thank
Just
you.
to add another wrinkle to it.
I can let that go.
I have enough trouble keeping track of the Pali.
You think this is enough?
Is that the Alaya concept?
Alaya.
Yeah,
Alaya.
and that's kind of, some critics of that would say that that's starting to point to, like more of like an existent reality. What's the word I'm trying to think of? Like an eternalistic view.
Yes.
Yeah.
One other question about Anathapindika. After his death, what was his attainment?
I think he was a stream
He
enterer.
was a stream enterer
Yeah.
already.
Oh,
Before death.
And so that he took rebirth, say, as a stream enterer.
In this two-seater heaven.
And to see that happen.
Which isn't a bad place.
Not at all shabby.
Yeah. Good place to hang out before your next rebirth in human realm. That's where they say Maitreya the Buddha is hanging out too. So maybe
Also where before the Buddha took rebirth.
That's right, he was born from the Tusita. So it must be the abiding place for the Bodhisattva who's about to become, or who will become the next Buddha. If you have to aspire for a place to be reborn. Okay, this is fairly short sutta. It's just kind of a repeat, in a sense, of the Malankya-Putta sutta that was read yesterday, but a slightly different version of it with a slightly different background story, and a very nice verse at the end as well. And this is Bahiya, and it's from the Udana, which is kind of a minor collection of the Sutta Pitaka. And this is from the Udana 1, number 10, Bahiya. I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Sawati in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Now at that time, Bahiya of the bark cloth was living in Suparaka by the seashore. He was worshipped, revered, honored, venerated, given homage. A recipient of robes, alms food, lodgings, and medical requisites for the sick. Then, when he was alone in seclusion, this line of thinking arose to his awareness. Now, of those who in this world are arahants, or have entered the path of arahantship, am I one? Then a devata who had once been a blood relative of Bahiya of the bark cloth, compassionate, desiring his welfare, knowing with her own awareness the line of thinking that had arisen in his awareness, went to where he was staying, and on arrival said to him, You, Bahiya, are neither an arahant, nor have you entered the path of arahantship. You don't even have the practice whereby you would become an arahant or enter the path of arahantship. And then Bahiya replies, But who, living in this world with its devas, is an arahant, or has entered the path to arahantship? Bahiya, there is a city in the northern country named Sawati. The Blessed One, an arahant, rightly self-awakened, is living there now. He is truly an arahant, and he teaches the Dhamma that leads to arahantship. Then Bahiya, deeply chastened by the devata, left Suparaka right then, and in the space of one day and night, went all the way to where the Blessed One was staying, near Sawati in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. At that time, a large number of monks were doing walking meditation in the open air. He went to them, and on arrival said, Where, venerable sirs, is the Blessed One staying, the arahant, right self-awakened? We want to see him. He has gone into the town for alms. Then Bahiya, hurriedly leaving Jeta's Grove and entering Sawati, saw the Blessed One going for alms in Sawati. Calming, his senses at peace, his mind at peace, tranquil and poised in the ultimate sense, accomplished, trained, guarded, his senses restrained, a great one. Seeing him, he approached the Blessed One, and on reaching him, threw himself down, with his head at the Blessed One's feet, and said, Teach me the Dhamma, O Blessed One. Teach me the Dhamma, O One well gone, that will be for my long-term welfare and bliss. When this was said, the Blessed One said to him, This is not the time, Bahiya. We have entered the town for alms. A second time, Bahiya said to the Blessed One, But it's hard to know for sure what dangers there may be for the Blessed One's life, or what dangers there may be for mine. Teach me the Dhamma, O Blessed One. Teach me the Dhamma, O One well gone, that will be for my long-term welfare and bliss. A second time, the Blessed One said to him, This is not the time, Bahiya. We have entered the town for alms. A third time, Bahiya said to the Blessed One, But it is hard to know for sure what dangers there may be for the Blessed One's life, or what dangers there may be for mine. Teach me the Dhamma, O Blessed One. Teach me the Dhamma, O One well gone, that will be for my long-term welfare and bliss. Then, Bahiya, you should train yourself thus. In reference to the seen, there will only be the seen. In reference to the heard, only the heard. In reference to the sensed, only the sensed. In reference to the cognized, only the cognized. That is how you should train yourself. When for you there will only be the seen in reference to the seen, only the heard in reference to the heard, only the sensed in reference to the sensed, only the cognized in reference to the cognized, then Bahya, there is no you in connection with that. When there is no you in connection with that, there is no you there. When there is no you there, you are neither here, nor yonder, nor between the two. This, just this, is the end of stress. Through hearing this brief explanation of the Dhamma from the Blessed One, the mind of Bahya of the bark cloth right then and there was released from fermentations, asavas, through lack of clinging. Having exhorted Bahya of the bark cloth with this brief explanation of the Dhamma, the Blessed One left. Now, not long after the Blessed One's departure, Bahya was attacked and killed by a cow with a young calf. Then the Blessed One, having gone for alms in Sawati after the meal, returning from his alms round with a number of monks, saw that Bahya had died. On seeing him, he said to the monks, "Take Bahya's body, and placing him on a litter and carrying it away, cremate it and build him a memorial. Your companion in the holy life has died." "As you say, Lord," the monks replied. After placing Bahya's body on a litter, carrying it off, cremating it, and building him a memorial, they went to the Blessed One, and on arrival, having bowed down to him, sat to one side. As they were sitting there, they said to him, "Bahya's body has been cremated, Lord, and his memorial has been built. What is his destination? What is his future state?" "Monks, Bahya of the bark cloth was wise. He practiced the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma and did not pester me with issues related to the Dhamma. Bahya of the bark cloth, monks, is totally unbound." Then, on realizing the significance of that, the Blessed One on that occasion claimed, "Where water, earth, fire, and wind have no footing, there the stars do not shine, the sun is not visible, the moon does not appear, darkness is not found. And when a sage, a Brahman through sagacity, has known this for himself, then from form and formless, from bliss and pain, he is free." Okay, so that's a very well-known sutta and a great contemplation to the instructions, as with Malankya-Putta, that in reference to the seen, there will only be the seen, just teasing apart the sense bases and how one can experience the sense bases without any attachment, without any clinging, without any sense of identity. It's just the experience of sight, sounds, taste, touch, tactile sensations, and the intellect ideas arising and passing away. And then that lovely verse at the end, which is seen in different places, slightly different ways too, but describing the deathless element, nibbana, as not where water, earth, not where the elements disappear and don't exist, but where they find no footing. I find that's a lovely way to refer to the experience of liberation as well. Any discussion or thoughts or considerations?
There was just one thing that sounded like a typo on there. He said he didn't bother me on account of those things connected with the Dhamma. It's supposed to be connected with the Dhamma. So that I mean, I never misheard it, but it sounded like, why would that be a bad thing? Bothering me.
Did not pester me with issues related to the Dhamma. Basically, I think it was more referring to the fact that he listened, he understood, and he realized, and that he basically just, I mean, I think it's probably the right translation. He just emphasizing that he just, didn't bug him with any questions at all. I think Bahya, didn't he have the designation of the one who realized the Dhamma the most quickly in the Buddha's dispensation or something like that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Some questions asked.
I think he was probably pretty well set up for it.
He just did it.
He just did it. No messing around.
Fairly quickly.
He might have had some years of work beforehand. Okay, we can call it the day then.